I thoroughly enjoyed this book, Holes by Louis Sachar. This genre isn't my favorite, especially because the target audience is middle-aged children, and I'm not one of those. But it has some advantages. I wanted something that was easy to read, something that doesn't use complex vocabulary to get across a simple point or spend hours and hours on mundane descriptions just to quote unquote set the mood. I wanted something that would take me out of some other heavy books that I was reading, so this perfectly fit the bill for that. Well, let's get to the characters very quickly, and then we can look at the plot a bit, and then we'll call the review off at that point. The main character. Oh, also, I haven't watched the book or read any of the other things associated with this book prior to this. I know that there is a great movie by, I don't know who the director is, but Shia LaBeouf is in it with Patricia Arquette, I believe. And then there is also two great companion novels. One is called Small Steps or Little Steps, maybe. Again, I'm forgetting the names, with two side characters. Their plot is developed further. And one is a survival guide, both written by the same author, Louis Sachar. So I haven't checked any of those out, but and I'm not going to. But this book, as a standalone, is extremely good at what it sets out to do. So again, how do you write a book that has so much meaning, but something that is aimed at children? What you have to do is you have to bring in universal themes of friendship, love, morality, justice. You have to craft a story around it that even a child can understand, and you have to demonstrate the world building through the plot. You cannot spend, like I said, hours describing a single scene. Your words, every word has to have a point. Every detail that you introduce has to have some consequence later down in the plot that it makes sense that you put it there. And again, just because this is written for children, the book is, again, not too big. You can finish it in maybe a week or two, even at an average pace. All of this is incredibly done by this author. So I don't have any nitpicks or even small changes in plot that I would have done otherwise. I could wish for the other side characters to be explained a bit more, maybe go into their character motivations. But any of these changes would make the book longer and take away from it being targeted towards middle-aged or even young adult, if you want to call it that, literature. So, keeping that in mind, this author did a great job at conveying, first of all, coming up with a story like this, and then putting in multiple characters that are very memorable to begin with, and keeping the plot fast-paced, so to say. Let's see what else I have in mind. The characters are Stanley Yelnats. Again, a big deal is made of how his last name is his first name reversed. Again, something that will appeal to that demographic. I liked it too. He is a character who is fat, who was bullied for it. He is accused of this crime of stealing sneakers, and he is incarcerated in Camp Green Lake. His experiences with his campmates are not that great to begin with. He is again bullied in camp also, even after getting a nickname like Caveman, which instills fear in the beginning. But as time goes on, we see some very annoying campmates that again beat him up for no reason, uh, accuse him of stealing sunflower seeds and such. Again, the point of all of this was to show that conditions at Camp Green Lake were not for the ordinary juvenile detainee, so to say. So he is faced with a lot of tough decisions that he has to make in such a tough environment, which he does. And there is much to learn from him, how in face of adversity you choose to walk forward, move on, when you have a condition where you have only, sorry, a situation where you have only split seconds to take a decision, whether to go after zero and help him or stay back and follow your regular routine as if nothing bothers you. You can learn courage from him. You can learn how to keep a level head in extreme conditions of extreme heat and no water and no food. And although we know that this is a fictional story, you still feel for Stanley so much so that you almost think that this is impossible. How is this guy doing it? But that's the lesson that you ought to take away, that you have to believe in yourself, that you can survive all of this, and you just keep going without looking back. It's incredible. A small tangent before we get to the other characters is how you intertwine mysticism, folklore into the story, and you can see very clearly how it follows Stanley through and through. From the beginning of the curse, where your great great grandfather didn't carry Hector Zeroni's great 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 grandmother's child up a hill and make him drink water. Oh, sorry, you didn't carry her. So now that Stanley is here and he does the same things beat by beat as per the folklore, as per the legend says, so to say. And when you do that, the curse finally breaks. So it's a very interesting juxtaposition of two different stories and how you follow both stories beat by beat. And you can see the curse being the reason for all the downfall. And when Stanley decides to correct all of those wrongs committed by his ancestors, and wrong here is in quotation marks, it's interesting how you build a story around these two and you combine these two to give us an experience that is unmatched, and there are no other words to describe this. Very well done. Imagine you know the story of Cinderella, for example, and you now imagine if the same thing happens to you. Would you act in the same way? Would you change some of the plot points to see if it makes a difference in your timeline? Did Stanley know all of these details before he went to camp? Hard to say. Let's get to Zero, who's Hector Zeroni. It's very interesting how they plant that he doesn't know how to read, and through the course of the novel, you see that when Stanley teaches him how to read letter by letter, syllable by syllable, and that comes in clutch at the end. It comes in very handy when he sees that what Stanley dug up in the last hole is his own bag. Well, you got to have that similarity of names between Stanley and his great 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 grandfather, and then you have this guy, Zero, recognizing that it's the same name and that's the name of Stanley, and then he speaks up and rescues him at the last moment to get the jewels and stock papers to Stanley, which make them almost millionaires, I think is how it's described, but a lot of money, which is again besides the point. But still, it's a good touch how they planted that right at the beginning. Very similar to how you introduce sploosh, for example, as this magic potion that Sam used to sell, and then which is ideally, I think, onion juice that lizards hate. That comes in clutch as well because that's what Zero and Stanley drink the day before they are caught, and that's what saves them from all the lizards crawling in the hole. Very well done again. All of these are classic writing techniques. I recognize that, but the impact they have is equally good, and I can always admire that for sure. What else do we have? We have the villain characters of Mr. Sir and Pendansky and Warden. I initially thought that Kiss and Kate Barlow and the Warden were the same people. Well, not the same, but maybe related as a mother and daughter kind of thing. Something like that is what I was imagining the plot to be, but when they introduced this other character couple which go after KB, all of the plot comes together and we understand how there's not so much of a difference between what is legend, what is folklore, what is mysticism that has come down through the ages, and what actually happens. And which again brings me to this point that all of the legendary stories we hear of, I don't know, Ulysses or Homer, Odyssey, for example, even though most of it is exaggeration and there is a lot of poetic, I don't know what you call it, literary liberty that is taken in explaining the stories to us lay people, they must have gone through so much adversity to become the characters that they are, and they are shaped by the stories that are told about them. Does that make sense? There must be some iota of truth in the legends, and that is what this story is essentially. And again, I previously mentioned the intertwining between folklore and real life stories. Very well done again. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Holes obviously being a metaphor for all the things that need to be fixed is pretty obvious, although it also makes sense in the plot. But I also recognize that you interpret this in so many different ways. You can imagine holes to be a safe space, to be something that is a mundane task that you do repeatedly. That you can imagine holes to be something that you jump over, obstacles, for example. Many, many metaphors here, and I'm sure I'm gonna spend a lot of time thinking about all the different things and how you tie it up into this neat little story. I wanted to end with a small comparison with Shawshank Redemption. I know this book came after Shawshank, although that was also a novella, and there are very similar themes between these two, mainly being a main character who is stoic in the beginning, doesn't react too much to adversity. He finds a friend who is in himself a recluse, but he helps you through difficult times. You stick to him, you stay loyal to him, but you also don't antagonize the bullies, so to say, so much so that they kill you. You keep a level head in all of these situations. You go through life one day at a time, and you don't pick fights that you aren't in. I remember there were so many situations with Stanley where I was screaming at the book, saying, why don't you hit him back, or why don't you curse him, or why don't you complain about this guy to the warden or to Sir? I'm sure I'm not as experienced as Stanley, or I don't know who the main, I forget the main character in Shawshank, but I know Red was the other guy. But anyway, how the main guy react, I wouldn't have reacted the same way, but I know that that is how one should react when you are pushed against the wall and death is imminent. How do you keep a level head? I don't get it, but these guys do, and that's why they survive, and that's why good things happen to them. Maybe that is again a small note that I wanted to make here. But all in all, very well written. If you need a small light book that has good characters, has a good message, has excellent writing, this is it. I'm excited to watch the movie after this, but I don't know if the other books that came after this one are equally good, so we'll see how it goes. But definitely read this book, worth your time. And thank you for listening to this review and to the audiobook as well.